Thanks, Val. As Val mentioned, I'm Krystle Herbrandson, Director of Sales here at Sucuri, and today we're going to dive a little bit deeper into website performance tool that Caleb mentioned on our previous webinar, CDNs. If you haven't checked out our webinar on website performance optimization, it's a great resource and could be a nice place to start performance optimization. It can be found at sucuri.net/webinars. A little bit about me. I'm a gadget fanatic. I love organization, and I'm deathly afraid of heights. I've spent much of my career surrounded by technology, which has bred my love for gadgets. Having spent about a decade working for a little company called T-Mobile and being a part of its growth into the player that it is today, I got to witness firsthand the evolution of when a phone went from being a simple cellular device used to make a call to the PDAs and smartphones of today. Along with it came the emergence of text and picture messaging, along with video calling. Over the course of the last decade and a half, our phones have gone from that black and white pixelated bar phone to what we hold in our hands today, a device far more powerful than the PCs of a decade ago. The internet and telecommunications are a similar playground. The internet has seen an increase in capacity in a relatively short period of time, similar to that of the mobile explosion. And the way in which people are engaging with content has expanded. People are expecting a desktop experience in their phone now, which means your site's performance and speed in particular should be at the top of mind. I hope you're ready to learn the ins and outs of website performance acceleration with CDNs. Let's jump into it. Topics that we'll be covering today are defining a CDN, how a CDN works, the history and evolution of a CDN, why to use a CDN, and the benefits, whether you have a small or a very large site. CDN landscape, CDNs and security, CDNs and DNS management working together, and considerations and complications when adding multiple CDNs and caching tools. And last but not least, we'll be covering those wonderful performance resource tools. At the end, I hope you'll walk away with an understanding of the functionality and associated benefits related to increased performance, high availability, and added DDoS protection through the implementation of a CDN. So, what does a CDN or content delivery network represent? All very simple words, but when combined, make a very fast and speedy network for your site to travel along. Let's break it down and start at the foundation, network. This represents the distribution of servers, points of presence, POPs, nodes, or edges. You name it, they have all different names. But these POPs are those that are located across the globe, which work together to provide an efficient traffic system to reliably deliver web pages and their content to users based on geographical presence or proximity to a particular POP. The network's purpose behind a distributed system of nodes all working together is to use caching across the network. Caching makes your website content readily available to end users regardless of their distance to the host server, or what we will come to know as our origin server. Essentially, with an optimized use of a network of servers, content can be delivered at its most efficient means possible. So content, let's talk about it. When delivering content, it's important to be familiar with the different types available to us. All content is not created equally, and many of us are familiar with static and dynamic, and we're now moving into live streaming. Static files are the ones that don't need to be generated, modified, or have anything additional happen between the request that the user makes and the origin server. This includes JavaScript, CSS, images, HTML files, and that brings us to dynamic content. The word is simple in form and transparent in nature. This content is frequently changing, and many a times this is what your website does to engage with the user, including animations, video, audio, which has helped us move into the world of live streaming. Streaming content is what we are currently experiencing today with the Netflix, Hulu, Facebook Live, and Snap. Streaming is delivered to users a bit differently than that of dynamic and static content. What we see with this content type is partially downloaded files made available to view while the rest continues to be downloaded. What does this mean for you and your website? It means that the slower your site is, and often becomes with the addition of all this great content, the less people are going to want to stick around and wait for it to load. The term latency often is used when discussing CDNs, and it's easiest to think of as that loading screen or the dreaded spinning wheel we've all seen when waiting for something to become available for us to watch. CDNs help in reducing the time that it takes for each piece of data to travel from the host server to the user, resulting in a lower latency and a more optimized user experience, ultimately helping to avoid drop-offs in users and resulting in better conversions. Now, let's break it down to the nuts and bolts. Terminology can get confusing, and there are often many names for the same things. It's important to understand the technology associated with a CDN. We're going to break it down and start with the basics. Origin server. What is this? This is where your website data is housed, as a CDN does not host your site. In other words, the origin server is just another name for your host. You can see it described in the CDN space as, the GoDaddies, the Bluehost, SiteGrounds, WP Engines. You pick it. The question of how a CDN works cannot be explained without addressing what CDN edge servers are. These can be explained as POPs, points of presence, edge nodes, and refers to the physical location of where the edge servers are located across the globe. These provide the ability to cache your content and deliver it to your end users. Oh, now it's time to move into those fun acronyms, TTFB and TT. What do they even mean? This means that when you bring up your website and you see the first elements being loaded, usually CSS, some text, static files, that's what you see with the time to first byte. And it's usually made up of 3 separate request components. What does this mean, and what does it matter if we're not robots or computers? What it comes down to is that for users, what matters most is the full website experience. The total time is what is used to measure the actual time that it takes to completely load a site for a user. If you see that there's a delta between the two, the time to first byte and the total time, it's often caused by the geographic distance or connectivity issues. You can use a performance tool to analyze the cause and see where the bottlenecks are and what you can do to better situate yourself for the user's experience. Looking for an appropriate CDN that covers the necessary geographical locations and the distribution is what you're going to need in order to ensure that the spikes in traffic don't incur bounce rates. There are 3 metrics that we often use. Connection time, literally the time that it takes for the server to connect, as well as the time to first byte and total time. Push and pull zones. CDNs are typically using 2 methods for delivering content. What we see now is often pull zone method, and it's best used because typically websites already have a host where files are managed and stored. Content gets pulled automatically from the origin server or the host server to the POPs or edge nodes and gets delivered to the visitors via the edge servers based on where they are geographically. It's also important to understand the term reverse proxy. Reverse proxy refers to, for CDNs, is that a CDN is really focused on the assets of your site, and therefore the CDN servers are able to more quickly deliver content to nearby visitors. It acts as an intermediary between the origin server and those users that are coming to your site. This is why CDNs are typically implemented and installed with a simple DNS-A record change, which brings us to caching. Caching is a major part of what a CDN does for a website. We could spend some time getting into the nuances of caching, but for the purpose of basic understanding, caching is the process of replicating your content across the network of edge servers, or POPs, to serve it up so that your content can be available quickly for the users. CDNs are comprised of nodes across a global network. The makeup of servers and nodes varies by CDN. The desired architecture can range from thousands of nodes with tens of thousands of servers over various POPs, or a global network with a strategically smaller number of POPs. For us at Sucuri, it's not about having the most POPs, but about being configured optimally for our audience, allowing us to route traffic through our super POPs and cache content at the edge servers to provide a fully optimized user experience. Here, you see what many of the CDN providers that started in the 90s designs look like. It makes sense that back then, there was a need for duplication, for load balancing, and redundancy. It's about what design and level of maintenance works best for the provider. Technology has since evolved, allowing for different approaches to the design of CDN networks. Both use an anycast topology to broadcast, but the approach to location and makeup of POPs and edge servers is what's different. What it all comes down to is the focus on total time to that last byte as a realistic metric, because that's what we really use, and that's what users actually care about. So let's look at what a request looks like when it's being made by a CDN with and without one, by a website with or without a CDN. As you can see from the first model, with a CDN, your readers get their content faster as it's stored closer to them and the requests have to take less hops and processing time. We have static content cached at the POPs, and conversations that are happening with your origin server and the host server are in relation to the dynamic content that needs to be checked and served back up. Without a CDN, every request that comes to your website, whether it be a bot or an actual user, needs to go through the host or origin server. What that means for performance is that there is only one lane for servicing customers. It often gets backed up and people are unwilling to wait in line. Performance is not just about the speed of the response for your readers, but it's also about alleviating the performance issues on your origin server. It all comes down to the user experience. Websites which run slow share a commonality of high bounce rates and less than desirable ratings from our dear friends over at Google. Google loves speedy sites and hates sluggish ones, resulting in potential negative impacts to SEO and conversions. When a website visitor requests a site's content, the server closest is what's going to respond. What we're seeing in this picture is what's happening between the CDN and the originating server. The user's request is being directed to the server within the CDN that is geographically closest to deliver the cached content. As we can see, all nodes have your data cached, and thus we are just waiting for the quickest route to win for the user, while also delivering any content that was not previously cached from the origin. As we discussed a lot about the nitty-gritty of CDNs and the terminology and technology that surround it, now let's get into what this means for you as a website owner or administrator. Specifically, Kissmetrics found that 40% of consumers will abandon a website that takes longer than 3 seconds to initially load. What this all comes down to is performance optimization. Let's face it, we're living in a highly demanding world that applies to our content as well. In a mobile-driven world where attention spans are short, website owners are seeing impacts to revenue, brand perception, and visitor engagement, among just a few, directly related to their site's performance. Regardless of the reason for visiting a site, we just don't want to wait, and we'll look elsewhere to a competitor that has it faster. Not all mobile providers are the same, and the experience is never consistent, making a responsive site a must. 50% of buyers will start on a mobile device and use more than 2 other devices prior to making a decision on purchase. CDN Evolution. The technology has made its way over the past 20 years, and as the internet and the content we consume has changed, so too has the CDN. In the 90s, CDNs were reserved primarily for larger organizations with a budget to support a substantial expense. It was built to deliver static HTML and downloadable content. The first generation focused on dynamic and static content delivery through replicas, edge computing, and networking. as content expanded to multimedia and video on demand, it meant so too did the CDN. The second generation built upon the focus of performance and added availability with the inclusion of load balancing, where traffic was distributed across the network of servers, reducing usage and increasing the availability and guarantee for it. Pricing for this solution came down, and still we saw the usage was primarily set for the corporate sector. The third generation, or rather the CDN that we see today, has continued to build from performance to performance and availability to performance, availability, and security. And just as we have seen with other technologies and its capacity, the increase has thus made a cost decrease, making it available to the masses of sites online today. CDNs emerged initially to solve the problem of stresses on networks caused by heavy bandwidth, and with the expansion of content, the necessity is there for us to implement CDNs. Today, as more aspects of daily life move online, organizations use content delivery networks to accelerate static content, dynamic content, mobile content, e-commerce transactions, video, voice, games, and so much more today. The CDN market has grown drastically over the last decade, and that growth is expected to continue in upwards of 20% year over year. If you haven't jumped on the CDN bandwagon with the 50% of content being delivered today, then I hope we have started to convince you to start planning. We've ventured into the world where we are constantly connected and tethered to our devices. There are 5 top contributing factors to the ongoing and upwardly trending success of CDNs: the 3.5 billion internet users, the content expansion into video, mobile, e-commerce growth, and so much more. These are some interesting facts to consider. Internet reach. Smartphones have helped us out here, as 2 out of 3 adults in the US own a smartphone today. Worldwide, smartphones will make up 50% of the mobile phone usage in 2017. We've gone from 1 billion internet users to 3.5 billion in the course of a decade. This significant growth is making CDNs a necessity for the traffic that is coming and the distribution needed. Content expansion. Facebook reported its users watch more than 4 billion videos every day, and 75% of that is all served up via a mobile phone. A CDN reduces the latency for high bandwidth content like streaming video. It's a seriously large amount of video content being consumed by the masses each and every day. With 35% of the world connected in some way, shape, or form to the internet, it's no wonder that users are becoming more sophisticated, and the expectations for website speed and performance, no matter the device, are higher, as mobile users expect similar web experience to our desktop. E-commerce. In the first quarter of 2015, retail e-commerce sites had more than 80 billion in sales, compared to 26.5 billion in the first quarter of 2016. CDNs are becoming imperative to provide a smooth e-commerce experience. Internet security is a huge topic, especially here at Sucuri, obviously. DDoS attacks are on the rise and seen as one of the most prevalent attack vectors today. A CDN allows you to load balance and alleviate bandwidth from such attacks. New ways of internet security are being developed, all of which have helped increase the growth of CDNs, as a cloud security adds another layer of security, helping to improve a website's overall security posture. Mobile internet consumption and demand for responsive, quick content has pushed the need for global connectivity where time is money. 34% of the globe is connected to the internet. How does this translate to an everyday website owner? Everyday users are not concerned, or in many cases, educated on what it takes to pull in content and deliver them a great user experience. It's our jobs as website owners and administrators to provide an optimized experience where they don't need to see behind the curtain. A CDN can improve your website speed by 60 to 70% overnight, and you can double your speed and not leave your readers stuck with that rating and loading screen. Depending upon where you host, you can also save on bandwidth usage. What's even better is that the price to entry is as little as free. We've talked a lot about initial load time, and it needs to come in at 3 seconds or less to keep a user. 60% will leave after 5 seconds if a site is not completely loaded. We have a 2-second barrier to get that site to a partial to complete. Sites that load faster ultimately result in higher satisfaction and consequently increased revenue. CDNs are able to enhance performance to allow for global scalability and ease of deliverability of all forms of content across all devices, all the while protecting you against DDoS attacks ever so present on the web, once again reducing the network load and costs. Now that we've established the benefit of distributing traffic to provide a global presence for your brand, a CDN will help in getting that done for an affordable cost, and you don't need insane traffic to benefit from the use of a CDN. With the increase in importance placed on website performance, more and more CDN providers are coming to market. Things to consider when looking for a CDN provider and our configuration options and functionality, as well as overall performance, cost, and service compatibility. Custom SSLs are a consideration. Be sure to choose a compatible solution. If you have a custom SSL, you need the proper configuration. Global coverage. Check the POPs to ensure that the coverage of continents and as well as the key geographic locations fit your business. Here's a few of our top players. Akamai is known as a global leading provider for speed and network connections. Max CDN is also very well known and has been in the space since 2009. Incapsula is also a very large player. They work with companies and popular sites such as Moz, Wix, Siemens, and others. CloudFlare, many of us have heard of them, and they are the ones that provide a nice free entry. It's a US-based company that provides content delivery network and distributed domain services, sitting between the visitor and that of the CloudFlare user's host experience. And here at Sucuri, we also provide an Anycast network that also utilizes our web application firewall to provide you a fully secure experience while DDoS is protected and speeding up your site with DNS management and CDN. At AWS, Amazon Web Services, it's a collection of cloud computing services, also called web services, that make up its platform. Make a decision that's based on your budget, your users, and what's necessary for your speed performance. The statistics around the severity of a DDoS attack are sometimes hard to process for an average website owner and user. Businesses that rely heavily on the availability of their web properties and thus protecting them from potential compromises requires a multifaceted, layered approach. The Amazons of the world might suffer losses into the millions because of one DDoS attack that can go unnoticed for 4.5 hours. With a CDN, you're going to have an advantage. You're going to be able to absorb less sophisticated DDoS attacks and simplify the use of your bandwidth. When a user lands on a page, dozens of distinct DNS queries are issued to identify the correct source of the content. DNS, or domain name systems, is the naming system used to converting domain names into Internet Protocol, or IP addresses, which is how the Internet communicates. Information from all domain name servers across the Internet are gathered together and housed at a central registry. Host companies and Internet service providers interact with this central registry on a regular schedule to get updated DNS information, which means that if the DNS system goes down consequently, the site is then not available as well because these are one and the same. The domain name is the human directory and the DNS is the computer's way of looking up the requested information. Having a managed DNS system decreases the risk of network failure because they are all built as an extremely reliable network with global distribution in conjunction with the CDN. Together, we see improvements to performance. The distribution of traffic across multiple CDNs and endpoints optimizes the overall performance. Reliability. We can rest assured that our site will be available for users when they get to it. And lastly, availability. Managed DNS services are ideal for companies and brands of all sizes. They offer global footprints and use advanced load balancing and routing techniques to minimize latency, maximize availability, and minimize costs. DNS is the first part of the lookup process. It is essentially what separates our brands from our consumers. If your DNS fails, then your brand as well should cease to exist. Latency or resolution time has been widely acknowledged consideration for e-retailers focused on end user experience. Google and Amazon have done studies and show that there's a 7% decrease in sales that can occur if a site takes longer than that 3 seconds to load. I know I keep talking about the stats on seconds to load, but it really does come down to just seconds that can cost you time and money. Keep that in mind when moving forward. That is 3 to 5 seconds that a customer takes to decide if your brand is worth it or not. People often come to us thinking more is better. And it's important to note that without the knowledge, the idea can get overly complicated. In many instances, caching can get stuck, users won't know where to go, and in the end, we have to have a very specific way to clear the cache. Most CDNs will work nicely with each other, but be mindful of what you're doing and understand that it might take some additional time to configure and troubleshooting. For most, having dual CDNs isn't necessary, but it is possible. The best configuration is if you use a CDN for your assets, the video, and one for your site. In those configurations, it works perfectly. Here's a list of some performance tools that provide options for decreasing the size of your images, having performance optimization checks, and Sucuri is always here working to add new webinars, guides, website tools to help you with a suite of resources for all website owners. Some of the ones listed are performance tool, website performance enhancements, as well as testing. And for our WordPress users, we always find a nice place in our heart for them. The guys over at WP Beginner have done a great job with providing some awesome tutorials, and many of them can be used across different platforms as they go into the steps of configuring CloudFlare as well as Max CDN. And Hummingbird is also a great performance tool for our WordPress users. Ultimately, you can get your CDN on your site up and running in really as little as 5 minutes. It's a simple DNS record change. Well, what you've learned today is how to speed up your website for visitors around the world, how to ensure availability of your resources and content, how to reduce the server load and resource depletion, strengthening the security of your website against DDoS attacks, increase of conversion and SEO rankings, how to make sure that your website can withstand a massive traffic increase, how to improve the user experience for a global audience, CDN options, configurations, and tools and resources, and understanding how to deploy and use the CDN with DNS. Thank you, and I think that we're ready for questions. Val?
Alrighty, thank you so much, Krystle. That was a very, just before I go into questions already asked, yes, we will be sending all of this webinar, but you also get it in an email. We're going to cross into questions with this one. The first question is, how does it know to call San Diego, for example?
Okay, sorry, you broke up a little bit there. I'll try and repeat the question. So the question was, how does the site know, or with a CDN present, how does it know to call a particular location if you're located in San Diego or let's say New York. Is that correct? Yep. So one thing to note that with CDNs is that they can use GeoDNS. So what it's going to know is it's going to know the actual proximity to where your site is located, and that's how it knows. So what does that mean for users is that based on my IP address here in California, it's going to know that when I then try and go to that website, it will pull up the first one available based on the geographic location. Is that the question, Val?
That is
Yep. Okay.
Correct, and that is the very good. There's another question. Apparently, my right. I don't know why people are saying that. It's not. Do we think of SSL everywhere or the Let's Encrypt offering with regards to CDN?
Okay, I think I got that. So I think that one thing to understand about SSLs is that they are not the end-all be-all for securing a site or stating that your site is secure. I do believe that Let's Encrypt is a fantastic offering that all sites should employ some sort of SSL on their site. But I do think that we do need to educate the masses on what particular layer of security that is providing, and that it's simply an encryption mechanism for the data that's being transferred between a site and the user, and not necessarily securing what is happening, but rather you can encrypt malicious content and send that back and forth as well. So I think that SSL is a necessity. Google loves it. We just came out with a blog post last week talking about the need for SSL and how Google is going to slap you on the hands if you don't have one. But I do think that it's important that we understand what exactly an SSL provides in relation to security, and what exactly a CDN provides in relation to security. So it is all, like we state, a layered approach. So all of these things are wonderful when added together.
Is CDN something one that only does business locally?
Okay, so I think the question was, how can a CDN benefit a business that only does local offerings, so their clientele is only local? I think that just the same as any other website, you can experience latency, regardless of if you're only doing business locally. Your host may not be in the same proximity to where you are, and thus it does make it a much speedier experience if you do implement a CDN, being that you're able to cache content, you can have controls over that, and ultimately it'll deliver up a very quick and speedy user experience.
Great. Performance start with the host and then influence? Okay,
so the question was, is a performance of a CDN impacted by the performance of your host? And so no, not necessarily. When you update that DNSA record, what you're then doing is you are routing your traffic through the CDN or the provider that you've now employed to be your performance enhancing mechanism for providing your site to a global audience. So no, the host does not necessarily play a factor. One thing to note, and something that people may not understand, is that if your host goes down, eventually your site will go down as well, even if you have a CDN in place, because cache content can only be available for so long. But in the end, it's also a benefit to you to have the CDN, because the cache content can be available where your host may be down for a minute or 2 or 15 or what have you. So no, your host performance does not necessarily impact the CDN's performance, but they all go hand in hand as they're all working together to serve up your website.
Great. Unfortunately, you only have time for one round. Do you need additional caching, and what are the impacts or the benefits for?
Okay. So what Val asked was, do you need to have additional caching in place, and what are the potential benefits? One thing that I think is important to understand is that what does your CDN provide in relation to caching options? A number of CDNs allow you to customize those options, which make it much easier for you to then maintain and manage that. There are obviously plugins available for different CMSs that help to cache content. I would simply advise that when you're using multiple things to do the same behavior, you can run into some issues. And so just test, make sure that clearing of cache happens in a systematic way so that you know exactly what's happening and where potential issues might lie. And that's it.
And thank you everyone who participated. We'll conclude today's webinar, but we have sent through will be answered by Krystle throughout the next days. Thank you. And Krystle, if you want to say.
Thank you, and do please get a CDN in place. It will do you some good. Thank you.